Hey folks, Professor Gray here, ready to talk to you about one sample hypothesis test types. In the running example that's been used in other videos, we have a magazine that claims that 63% of people in the U.S. are in favor of outlawing cigarettes. You decide to test this claim and ask a random sample of 200 people in the U.S. whether they are in favor of outlawing cigarettes. Of those 200, 98 are in favor of outlawing them. So we're interested in testing at a 5% significance level the claim of the magazine. Before we can test the claim of the magazine, we need to know what type of hypothesis test to conduct. There are one proportion z-tests. That's for a hypothesis test involving one proportion. And it uses a one proportion z-test with a normal distribution and the test statistic shown on this slide. And there are z-tests. Those are for a hypothesis test involving the mean and a known sigma, a known population standard deviation. The z-test uses a normal distribution, that's why a z appears. And the test statistic is shown on this slide. It is a z-score. And it does use the standard error of the mean. You can see that in the denominator of the formula. So there are some central limit theorem things going on behind the scenes of this test. Lastly, there are t-tests. That's for a hypothesis test involving the mean and an unknown standard deviation of the population. It uses a t-distribution and the test statistics shown on this slide. You'll notice that the z-score used in a z-test and the t-score used in a t-test are very similar, but instead of using sigma, we use s, the sample standard deviation. In real-life applications, it's much more likely that we do not know what the population standard deviation is. So a t-test is often an appropriate test. Well, you can use the formulas that were on the previous slides to find the test statistics for a hypothesis test. And then you can compare that test statistic to the critical value in your distribution. Alternatively, you can take those formulas and convert them to probabilities and then compare those to your significance level. Or you can do so using a calculator. All three of these types of tests are found in the Stat menu. If you press Stat, use the right arrow to go to Test. The one proportion z-test is number 5 on a TI-83. A z-test is usually the very first test in the menu, and a t-test is normally directly below the z-test. So in our running example, let's identify the type of hypothesis test that's being used. This hypothesis test concerns a proportion, 63%. For a hypothesis test involving a proportion, we use a one proportion or a one prop z-test. That's my answer.